Hi, I'm Barbara Rimkunis, and this is your Exeter History Minute. It's probably time to talk about it, huh? It's probably time to talk about the 1918 influenza pandemic. You can gain a lot of insight from looking at the past, but sometimes it's just not very comforting. Here at the History Minute, we like to keep things light. We like to look at the more unusual or odd bits of our town's history. Sadly, 1918 Exeter's story was a lot like everywhere else in the world. And the flu outbreak wasn't the biggest story. We were fighting World War I in 1918. Nearly everything you heard or did involved helping the boys. People were urged to grow victory gardens, join the Red Cross, conserve meat. There was a coal shortage. New Hampshire had primary and state elections in the fall of 1918. There was a lot going on. The first news about the flu came in May. I found a 3-sentence article in the Portsmouth Herald that announced, "Spain has the grip." Grip is an old word for flu. The grip didn't reach here until September. The Exeter newsletter ran an article on September 27th, but by then it was already quite serious. Sometimes you don't realize how bad things are getting until you're right in the middle of it. Our other source for this epidemic is the 1918 diary of Exeter resident Helen Tufts. Helen was 21 years old that fall, living at home, teaching piano lessons. The first hint we get from her is also September 27th, when she writes, "Too much influenza, so I decided not to go to Boston." Exeter Hospital was already feeling the stress. In the following weeks, the doctors and nursing staff would be taxed to the utmost, many falling ill themselves, one of the nurses dying. The newsletter said, "To list its victims is impractical. They are of all classes and ages, and in instances, entire families are affected. Manufactories, stores, and schools have their victims." At least we weren't as bad as nearby Portsmouth, which had to prohibit all public meetings. Of course, this means that in late September, with an obvious epidemic going on, we were still working, shopping, and going to school. That only lasted about another week. As more people fell ill and sometimes died, the town began to take action. Public schools were closed the beginning of October. The Ioka Theater was shut down by the Board of Health. Churches closed. Phillips Exeter Academy, a boarding school, had to decide whether to keep the boys on campus or shut down and send them home, a possibility that might spread the flu further. This spring, 2020, the Academy had to make a similar decision. This time, however, the students were already scheduled for break before COVID-19 had really spread. This time, they went home. In 1918, the boys were kept in town, and the school had to set up an emergency hospital in the gym. Helen, our piano teacher, was called upon to help take care of the sick boys, a task she accepted with enthusiasm. "Praise be, I'm really helping in this epidemic. It's a grand feeling, for it is all from a sense of patriotism," she wrote. Within less than a week, Helen was ill with the flu. Her diary becomes days of rested in bed. The doctor visits frequently. In fact, it seems like everyone visited her, bringing flowers and cookies and pies. And that brings up some questions that we probably never thought about to ask about the 1918 until recently. How much social distancing did they do? Well, as we said, the schools were shut for about 6 weeks. A lot of businesses closed down if the owner fell ill, but an awful lot of society continued on. With the war, working, as Helen pointed out, was considered one's patriotic duty. The advice people received was what they read in the newspaper. Exercise due caution, dress warmly, eat nourishing food, keep as much as possible in the open and avoid crowds, and most of all, fear and worry are dangerous. I tried to find out if there were any laws or regulations or even advisories about wearing a mask in Exeter, and I couldn't find any. There was a notice in the Portsmouth Herald mentioning that the Red Cross Sewing Division was making facial masks and pneumonia jackets for anyone who wanted them, but there didn't seem to be any regulations like you found in other parts of the country. A pneumonia jacket, by the way, was a canvas vest, sometimes with rubber tubing. It was designed to keep the chest warm. It was pretty much the only treatment for pneumonia in 1918. There was no supplemental oxygen, no respirators, no antibiotics. The death toll in Exeter spiked in October and then quickly relented. November 11th brought the end of the war. There was a big parade and spontaneous party in town when the armistice was signed. In December, the number of deaths began to creep up again into the new year. It receded and spiked again in the late spring of 1919. It's hard to tell exactly how many Exeter residents lost their lives during the outbreak. We can be sure there were at least 25 from October through January. That might not seem like many, and it doesn't take into account those that have been misdiagnosed early on, but this was in a town of just over 4,000 people. We didn't experience the horror of big cities. There were no mass graves in Exeter. The epidemic itself was quickly buried by history, overwhelmed by the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and another world war. And here we are again. Let's remember this time. Stay safe, Exeter. This is the Exeter Historical Society at www.exeterhistory.org.